I used to have a bit of a hard time in discussions about gender. They confused me, made me uncomfortable. I felt as if they were too strange to grasp, too complex to try to. It took me more time than I would have liked to wrap my head around them. But it wasn't until recently that I realized that the reason why might be that I myself struggled with my own gender expression, with my own femininity. This is me when I was 4, 5 years old. My hair was very, very short and my ears weren't pierced, which is basically a norm for the girls in our culture. And so people would often assume that I was a boy. I looked like a boy, physically speaking. I remember how uncomfortable this made me feel. And so as a result, I would only wear skirts and dresses, pink, purple, covered in glitter. I didn't own a real pair of pants until I was about 11. Femininity then was a privilege I had to fight for. It was something I needed to deserve. It was something I strived for and longed to be. It was also something that I was proud of, something to show off to the world. I changed schools when entering middle school, and a few things changed. I discovered I liked learning a lot. Also that I was pretty good at it, and I became ambitious very quickly. I began taking initiative in projects. I became bossy. And suddenly, pigtails and purple bracelets started looking funny on a girl claiming to want to change the world. And people looked at me and shook their heads. Silly little girl. My classmates would laugh at me. I looked a bit weird and acted weird. Flowers and ribbons didn't really fit into the time when everyone was trying to be cool and a little edgy. I told myself I didn't care, but over time the number of skirts in my closet began to diminish. I started to dress differently, to act differently, to speak confidently and laugh loudly. I was good at math and quickly made friends with boys too, ignoring their misogynistic jokes I only started hearing later. 2 years from then, other girls around me began to discover their own femininity, and for some reason, I looked down on them, as if they were stuck at a stage I moved on from. I called them names, feeling superior, better, somehow. For looking into a book instead of a mirror, I would tell myself I was not like other girls. It is only now that I wonder what was more messed up. The word slut directed at a 12-year-old or coming out of a mouth of a 12-year-old. This was still when feminist was just a word a guy yelled at me on a field trip. I remember feeling offended by the tone he used, spitting the word as if it was too disgusting to taste. It took me time to understand truly what it meant. I worked with it, thought about it, talked about it, and at last, I repented for what I used to say about the girls who painted their nails and dyed their hair and were not afraid to show confidence about what their bodies looked like. But it wasn't until later, when a friend of mine called me a tomboy, that I realized that somewhere along the way, I have rejected a part of myself. That in the struggle of wanting to be defined by more than just my sex, I abandoned the idea of femininity almost altogether. And even if I now cheered and admired the girls who wore their sexuality on their sleeve, I unconsciously excluded myself from the equation, acting as an observer rather than a participant in the group that I am a part of. There are many things feminism can look like. There are many things femininity can look like as well, both of them aligning it much more than just their ambiguity. I find it fascinating the idea that they cannot exist along each other, the perceived juxtaposition of the two so strong we feel the need to reject one in order to become the other. It doesn't surprise me anymore when my friends sometimes feel forced to choose. I am not a feminist. I don't hate men. You know, I am for women's rights and stuff, but I am not a feminist. It's just too much. I feel old-fashioned. You know, I do want a family one day. I am not a feminist. I shave my armpits. I have heard all of those in one context or another. Well, it is true that some of them come from a simple misunderstanding of what feminism is. I think we have to admit that there is more to it than just misinterpretation. While working on this talk, I watched and read and listened to a myriad of media taking on the very same issue, ranging from Simone de Beauvoir's philosophy through other TED Talks on similar topics, all the way to TikToks of modern housewives. They all have vastly different definitions of what femininity is. For some, it's biological, for some, cultural. For some, only found it women, while for others, disconnected from the idea of gender altogether. But there is one thing most of them have in common, and that is the idea that somewhere along the way, while fighting to be seen as equal to men, for our own right to be perceived what is now seen as masculine, we as a society have rejected, abandoned the idea of femininity altogether and started looking down on it. And if there is one thing that I have to agree on with anti-feminists, it is that yes, our society might be in imbalance, but this imbalance doesn't come from the empowerment of women. It comes from the mostly Western cultural rejection of what is stereotypically perceived as feminine. Because while women and girls are increasingly allowed and encouraged to be masculine, everyone is taught to disregard femininity as such. Doing anything like a girl is still an insult. Boys are still told not to cry or to be vulnerable. After more than 100 years, we still haven't found a way to valorize housework economically or socially. Female-dominated industries tend to be systematically underpaid and undervalued, regardless of their importance in our society. Education, nursing, childcare, social services. Women are disregarded in car safety testing, and as a result, are 73% more likely to be injured in a car crash as drivers. Drug testing is done predominantly on the male biology. Even female rats aren't used that much in experiments because of their hormonal changes during the menstrual cycle. Feminism has come far, but we definitely still have a long way to go. To fight, to be valued for whoever we decide to be. To fight, to have our work appreciated based on its merit instead of our gender. To feel safe and secure expressing ourselves the way we want to. To not have to change the way we speak, we dress, we stand, or smile, or walk, or for God's sake, breathe in order to be taken seriously. To be allowed to be our unapologetic, vulnerable, loud, gentle, and imperfect selves. To be allowed to simply be people. To be allowed to simply be.